What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Made You a Mixtape podcast. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe. On today's episode, we have a real treat for you. The one and only sports media personality, reporter, producer, author, Lisa Bowes. Lisa, welcome to the show. How are you?
Well, I'm great. Thanks, Jason, for having me.
Now, let's get right to Lucy Tries Sports. Can you tell us about this book series?
Well, this is something that has become a true passion project. I began this right before I was going to cover women's hockey at the Vancouver Olympic Games. So it has been a while that I've been on this, but really the nuts and bolts, Jason, is that this book series is all about inspiring our early readers to be active, to realize the benefits of sport, to persevere. Very important. That's why it's Lucy Tries Sports. And if we can do that, if we can inspire those things, then we think that will then help them lead that healthier and happier life.
Now, obviously, with everyone being pretty much told to stay at home for the past year, how important is it going to be for kids to get back out there? Like even now when they can, depending on how bad the numbers are, wherever they are, how important is it for kids to get out there and be active, given that in some cases they're not actually going to school and being active?
Yes, well, we really have to reach our parents to really engage them in that physical activity, especially when they don't have that opportunity at school right now. Certainly in Ontario, it's very challenging, especially when there is no school. Here in Alberta, we also, some of our kids are out of school. So it's really about encouraging just those fundamental movement skills as well. And it's really about even just walking and biking and scootering. But certainly when we do get back to the other side, as I like to say, we really want to encourage that entry-level sport, the grassroots sport. And, there are almost 200 sports in the world that we can try, that our kids can try. And I firmly believe, I'm also a phys ed major, Jason, so I'm coming full circle on my physical education degree, because there really is an activity for everyone and for every child. Maybe they don't want to be engaged in a team sport or the mainstream sports of hockey and basketball, soccer, but maybe curling is something that they would be brilliant at. Maybe they have that analytical mind and it still gives them that team, that ability to work with a team, which are so important for life skills. So right now I can share with you that before COVID, only 15% of our Canadian children aged 5 to 11 were reaching their recommended activity levels. And now in COVID, that has dropped to 5%. So really, this is a pending children's health crisis. So I'm really trying to help reinforce how important it is that our kids keep active, keep moving those bodies, because they were designed to move. So before COVID, in COVID, and after COVID, so important for just health outcomes in general.
One of the things that, I know I can speak from experience, parents have to deal with is getting their kids away from things like video games or getting them off of the screen time. What are some of the things that you tell kids? Because I know you've done, at least lately, some virtual visits with some of the schools. What do you tell them in order to encourage them to unplug from the screens and get outside and be active?
Well, I don't actually really speak to that whole screen time issue. I try to, leave that to parents and to teachers. But what I do reinforce is that value of reading and the importance of reading, and really how that fires the imagination and it keeps your brain happy. And I think all the experts too in this space would share with all parents that screen time is really, it's fine if it's in moderation, right? And yet the children can get so engaged by some of that content. So it's really about, maybe you have a little screen time, but then you go outside, you try to move those bodies, maybe you help around the house, you do other things using your brain and try to moderate those pieces. But I know it is so hard. I have a 14-year-old and I know all about that, about trying to ensure that she is not spending all her time online, especially when in school they're online already. So now we've really increased the screen time for them. just in school alone. So it's really, for me, I think, Jason, the most important thing, I think, is that free outdoor play. I think if we can really kind of work on that and see what the kids can do outside, but there's no magic bullet. It's really, we're all trying so hard to just get around that.
And I'm sure one of the toughest things too, especially in that early childhood, discovering their love of sports, is finding the sport that they actually gravitate to. As as the books come out, and there's books, Lucy tries hockey, there's all the different sports there. Do you find that the kids have been gravitating towards specific books, or do you find it's been kind of across the board, it's been an overall acceptance of the Lucy tries sports series?
Right. Well, we started because, as I told you, I was in that Olympic mindset, getting ready for the Vancouver Games, and that's how we started with Lucy tries luge and Lucy tries short track speed skating. And with the luge book, in my virtual school visits this winter, I really worked hard at making that connection with the kids about tobogganing and sledding. That really is luge. So that book actually was doing really well in the wintertime, because we were completely translating for them something that they could do during COVID times. You could toboggan and sled with your families when the conditions were right, and if you were keeping it at a distance. So that was really actually a wonderful connection for us to make. Short track speed skating, again, we're linking it to just picking up those fundamentals of learning to skate. And I think a lot of families really took to our ice rinks this winter and outdoor ponds, and were able to do that. And so therefore, I was able to encourage children to see speed skating as another option for them once they learned how to skate. And, maybe they're not wanting to play hockey or figure skate or ringette, but they rollerblade. And so really, it's to be able to make those connections to things that they maybe hadn't thought about, or their parents hadn't thought about, because there are speed skating clubs right across this country. But for sure, soccer is very popular, hockey is very popular, and basketball. Certainly basketball is popular. And in the basketball book, we actually open with a playground. And one of Lucy's friends is playing a little one-on-one with her cousin, who turns out to be a pro player, like a Toronto Raptor. And so I'm able to then make that connection for just playing outside, playing a little hoops at distance with your family. So in many ways, the books have been okay with COVID. It's only when we've gotten to things like playing in the soccer game that we've had to really say, well, until you can, maybe just play with a soccer ball in your backyard and learn some skills with your footwork. So we really had to adapt, just like all of us are adapting and trying to pivot and find our way through COVID. So too have I as an author, and also just reinforcing messaging in the books that also connects to being in COVID times.
Now, before you were bringing us, books about encouraging kids to play sports, you've been bringing us, sports highlights and sports stories through your, pretty much most of your career. Can you walk us through your broadcasting career from the beginning to, to where we are now?
Jason, how long is this podcast?
I've got all day.
Oh my goodness. Well, I will try to give you the Cole's Notes version, okay? Gee whiz. Well, I think it's always important that I always want people to know that for me, and some of you may know me obviously from being on front of the camera, sharing the sports highlights and reporting and hosting and play-by-play and all those things. But really, my whole career really began, the foundation of my career goes back to the original TSN newsroom, where I was one of the first editorial assistants. Yes, I was the first female in that role, and that is where we are hired to write the highlights and the highlight packages for the commentators. And our role was to make the commentators look good. And that was an incredible job. So from there, that gave me a foundation in terms of writing for television and writing sports, especially for television. And from there, I then went into reporting. And so I'll just quickly go through the stops. I began reporting at CTV in Winnipeg. Then I went back to TSN reporting for what we then opened up, the Winnipeg Bureau, that is so beautifully handled today by Sarah Orlesky. And then I was moved to Calgary for TSN. And then I was moved to Toronto for TSN. Became a commentator for Sports Desk. So that was kind of neat because here I was starting as a writer and then worked my way up. I guess it took me 8 years to then become a commentator on TSN. And then from there, I went to The Score, and from The Score to CBC. And in CBC, I had a wonderful opportunity to do some sports documentary work, which I just loved. And from CBC, I then took an opportunity to come back out west, a lifestyle change, wanted to get back out to the mountains. And my husband of 3 weeks, we moved to Calgary, and I came back for CTV. And so that's really my broadcasting, hopefully in under 2 minutes.
I think we've got the nice condensed version that works out quite well. For those who remember The Score, before it was just an app, but where there was actually a channel. One of the shows that you produced was Sports Access, and before we started recording here, we were talking about the show being well ahead of its time, and it definitely was. Can you tell us about Sports Access and how important it was to get that coverage out there of women in sport?
Oh, thank you, Jason, for that question. Because I think all of us who worked on Sports Access were so proud of what we were doing, because back in this would have been the year 2000. So incredibly, 21 years ago, Anthony Ciccione, who was my boss at The Score at the time, and he wanted to do something different. And they came up with this concept of a show that was really highlighting women's sports. And so Sports Access was born, and the access was really the only nod to the fact that this was a show about women. It was double X for the access part. And I really worked hard to really just make this show was really all about compelling storylines. And it was really, yes, it was women, and you could see that as soon as the show came up, but the thing was really driven by what I felt was strong content. And I loved doing that show. I do believe it was ahead of its time. I know it was ahead of its time, and especially, Jason, because it was on a hardcore sports network. And it really did good numbers at that time. And then we were on for a second season. And I just loved working with our little crew, and we worked so hard. There weren't many of us, but I think we all saw the value of it, the importance of it, to be able to showcase all these incredible athletes. And I have spoken about very publicly about how I don't think we really need to be separating things like, I hear sometimes people will say, well, it's for the Final Four, for example, it's the women's Final Four and it's the men's Final Four. And I'll say, why can't it just be the Final Four? And maybe you have a logo that is the distinction. But as soon as you turn on the television or watch it online, you see that it's women or it's men. I think words matter. Words are important. And so Sports Access was really a neat thing to be a part of. And I'm so happy to see that Tara and Ali are taking that torch, ahead, moving the baton ahead with Top of Her Game on Sportsnet. I
was going to mention Top of Her Game because that really, you think about, the transition from Sports Access to a show like Top of Her Game, it definitely paved the way. We're seeing a lot on social media of, women and men as well speaking up about the importance of equal coverage for women's sports as well as men's sports. How important is it for not just fringe, like outlets, on the internet, but like major sports networks to really put it out there and like put in prime time women's sports?
I really think all we have to do is look to Bianca Andreescu in her big run at the U.S. Open to see that that's a compelling storyline, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And that, yes, she is a woman. Yes, she is Canadian. And in that, just in showing that in prime time, you're following a compelling storyline. And you could say the same thing about women's soccer, especially has really broken through. I think soccer has done a tremendous job. And when Christine Sinclair has as many boys that want her autograph as girls, that also is very powerful. And I've been speaking to this, for probably 20 years now, is that sports audiences, about half of your sports audience, and it was back 20 years ago, Jason, I remember it was 48% of the sporting audience were females. So we need to accept that our coverages, our coverage of sport really has to be looking at both sides of the audience and then the children as well. And so it is really important because it's all about if they can see it, they can be it. And that's why my Lucy book series, Lucy Tries series, is completely reinforcing that there is a female character in a sports series, but boys like her too. Kids do not see gender or color. And so when boys are seeing this female and girls are seeing this female character, the boys see her differently, the girls see her differently, but they both benefit from seeing a character like that in a book series, just like our children benefit from seeing these incredible athletes in front of them. And I think back to when I was growing up, I mean, I didn't have any role models like girls that I could look at on the screen to see. I had Diane Jones-Konahowski from the 1976 Montreal Olympics, and I went into track because of her. But there were very few, right? So now I just think it's wonderful that our little girls can see what is possible, but our little boys can watch it too, just to see great sport. Because in many ways, we can also never compare them, right? Women's hockey, men's hockey, two totally different sports, two totally different games, different rules, different everything. So I hope that answered your question.
When you take a look at an organization like the Grand Slam of Curling, where it's like, okay, the men and the women, they're playing same time, same tournament. Yes, it's, the men's trophy and the women's title, but, it's still everyone's there all at the same time and everyone getting equal treatment. Do you see, tournaments like March Madness ever getting to that point where it's just like everyone gets the same treatment, everyone gets treated, with that A-list status?
Well, I think it's slowly coming. I really, for the first time in a very long time, I see some movement and momentum in this space. Certainly when we talk about the NCAA, we have to say, well, first we've got to get their weight rooms figured out first. We've got to get, how they prepare for the tournament has to be equal. I think Title IX has done a lot for women's sports down in the United States. I mean, we're seeing so many different momentum shifts. We're also seeing sponsors come in now more than we ever have. When I first started to do women's hockey play-by-play, it was very difficult to get sponsors for those properties. And that's 20 years ago now. It's mind-boggling. But now we're seeing Dove, we're seeing Secret, we're seeing all these different sponsors come in. And I think that momentum is really refreshing. It's really interesting to see it. And I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing, but it will take time. It will continue to take time. There's still a lot of work to be done to move it where it is equal. Certainly Serena Williams did a lot for tennis, right? For equal pay. That's another element to this discussion.
You mentioned not having many mentors to look up to when you started sports broadcasting, and now do you see women who currently get into sports broadcasting looking to you as a mentor, and what advice do you give to them as they're starting their broadcasting journey?
Well, I feel very fortunate that I have young broadcasters that do reach out to me to ask me for advice. Interestingly enough, most of those young broadcasters, Jason, are men. And so that's really wonderful for me as well, just to, I guess, the backdrop of what we've just been talking about men and women, because really at the end of the day, we are sportscasters, we are sport broadcasters. Obviously, I'm a woman. We can see that quite clearly. So I do love mentoring them. And you're right, I did not have many. So it's really, I feel my responsibility to give back. There is one female who is still with me to this day, 30 years later when I first met her, and that's Lisa Seltzer, who is a producer director for the Chicago Blackhawks. And she started that many, many moons ago. But I was looking to Dan Patrick. I wanted to be like Dan Patrick. So I had mentors, or I had role models, I should say, but they were men. And I think the same thing goes the other way, is that I can mentor men and women. But I do love to do that. And I guess what I share with them, what I tell them, There's one actually in particular that I'm thinking of. It's really about, what do you want to do in this industry? What is your goal in this industry, and what is your 5-year plan, and what is the best way for you to go about to get into that, to get to that 5-year plan? Because our industry is so different from when I broke in. So different. It's really about content providing, isn't it? It's about being a content creator. And there are many things that I see our young reporters do that, I mean, we would never do 20 years ago. So there is, for me, it's very different from the journalistic integrity of what we're talking about here. There is a decidedly strong line from the journalist, and if we're just talking sports, to the team. But I definitely see that line blurs and blurs and blurs so much more than it ever used to. And so I guess one of my big things I always like to share with broadcasters is that we are not promoters of these teams. We are journalists. We are sharing the information in a factual way with the audience. And that's something that I will always try to encourage with our young broadcasters. But everybody has a different journey, right, Jason? Everybody has a different approach. And so I just try to give them my best ideas and thoughts about how they can build their brand.
Now, you've done a lot of producing behind the scenes as well. There was the sports journal program on CBC, and of course Sports Access. How much of that did you translate into creating the Lucy Tries Sports series?
Oh, this is maybe one of the best questions I have ever received. I have actually, and it really is interesting, because writing a children's book is actually very, very similar to producing sports television. Okay, writing a children's sports book and producing sports television. And it's very similar to me as a reporter. And so the writing and the producing of that is almost the same thing, because the illustrator is the camera. So is the camera operator, the illustrator, and I'm writing. So writing to television, we write a certain way. Writing in a children's book is very similar, because we are writing to pictures. So the exact same thing is what we do in television. And so I guess, yes, I took those skills from writing for TV for so long, writing to pictures, and then thinking about the visuals, because these are picture books. So they really are. I was really blessed to be able to have that background, to bring that into the Lucy Tries Sports series. The only difference, of course, is that these books rhyme. And so that takes me a little bit longer, because I'm working with 5 and 6 syllables, and to make them rhyme and to flow and the cadence. But 100% very, very similar to producing TV.
I was wondering about that, because the books are so wonderfully illustrated. What's your input as far as the illustrations go?
Yes, James Hearn is just brilliant. Jason, I have to tell you, when he first drew Lucy, and it took me 3 years to find an illustrator, and when he first drew Lucy, and our first meeting, he brought his sketch of her, because it had been in my brain for 10 years before that. I cried, because he just nailed her, what was in my imagination, sort of this Pippi Longstocking type character with freckles, red hair, sporty and athletic, and appeal to boys and girls. So James, that brilliance, I feel so blessed to have him as my teammate. What happens is that I write the story first and kind of have my draft, and then I send it to him. He noodles it for a bit. Then he and I typically meet, and I say to him, so for example, in the short track speed skating, there is a sequence where I actually have asked him to create an aerial type shot, as if it was a drone shot over top of the oval, and the little pack of skaters skating around the oval. So I would suggest that to him. He would then go and sketch that out. So many times he and I, it is a true collaboration between the author and the illustrator. And from that, what happens is it then is sent to Orca Book Publishers, our wonderful publisher out of Victoria, BC, and Custer, Washington, and then a layout person and an editor then go through it. So it is a real team process, but it does begin with James and I kind of creating what this is going to look like and how it's going to read and how the pictures and the words go together.
When it's time for you to sit down and write the book, how do you set the mood for yourself? Do you have some music playing in the background? Do you prefer like a nice quiet room? What is the Lisa Bowes writing process?
Oh, I wish I had a real straightforward answer to this, because it really, I think, for me anyway, and all authors are different, but for me anyway, if I have that idea in my head, if I see something, like for example, I'm seeing so many kids on scooters. Okay, so I have a notepad with me everywhere I go, in my purse, in the car. And when I see something like scootering, and the kids in our virtual school visits keep telling me, oh, scooter, Lucy tries scootering, or how, I don't even know how we would say that, Lucy tries to scooter. Um, I write it down right away. So I start to think about what it looks like, or what are some of the words I could use that could describe a child on a scooter. And so my process is really all over the map. There have been times that I've been at our family cottage north of Huntsville and finished basketball there in a very quiet, serene type setting. And then short track speed skating, I actually wrote a number of stanzas, if you can believe it, in the lodge at Nikiska ski area, which is an incredibly busy, chaotic scene with all the families, right? Pre-COVID, everybody in the lodge, having lunch, be in and out of their runs. So I'm really kind of all over, but I can say though that it definitely is, when I see it, I start to write it down right away. So I have notepads, and I'm always thinking and always writing all the time.
Do you ever think or hope that one day someone's going to come up to you and say, we want to do a Lucy Tries Sports, animated, cartoon for an educational cartoon for kids? Do you hope that day will come?
Oh, I do. It's one of my dreams. It's definitely stage 2. I see for Lucy. I believe the book series was important that we start with that for the Lucy IP, if you will. If we think of Dora as the explorer, I see Lucy as the perseverance champion. And I think that her world has an incredible future ahead of, she has an incredible future ahead of her. Her and her diverse friends, they have the opportunity to reach children on a global scale. The tricky thing is, I think that we want to, if we go that route, Jason, is that we also want to encourage our children not to be just watching Lucy content on a screen or on an app or what have you. We want them to, watch and now get outside again, right? Go grab a book as well, right? So I feel really good about how we started with this book collection. I think there's many more Lucy Tries books that we can do. But for sure, I would love to see her enter off into the digital space and really connect with kids in an even, in a different way and in a more expansive way.
So before we get to the big question of the podcast, I'm going to put a hypothetical out there. If Lucy were to have her own theme song, from a song that already exists, what do you think Lucy's personal mantra theme song would be?
Wow. Well, I think it'd have to be something about let's go, let's go. Something with let's go in it, and something with tries, right? I'm thinking about all the music out there that involve the word try. I think it would be something along that, something about, maybe even Eye of the Tiger.
Oh, geez, that's such a pump up song too.
Right? Something like that. Something about you've had I think many times in Lucy's arc of her story, if you will, there are times when she is nervous. There are times when she's not sure, and she has the support of her family, the support of her coaches, to encourage her to keep trying, just like children have the support of their parents and their teachers to keep trying as they learn new skills, like reading and writing and learning their numbers. And it's hard. I mean, some kids are also trying to learn another language, and that's hard to do. And so I think any song that is about that perseverance or overcoming, or I can hear, the Eye of the Tiger, which always I think gets so many people, pumped up and thinking about Rocky. And and I think Rocky is also the epitome, is he not, of perseverance, right? That character alone, and what he, taking all those blows, right? But he just kept
Mm-hmm.
standing in there. So I don't think Lucy's not, I don't know, Lucy could try hockey though, or try boxing as well. But yeah, I think to answer your question, I'd say something along Eye of the Tiger, or Let's Go, 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 or Try, something in there.
I do like the fact that you mentioned, trying mathematics and trying new languages. If for anyone who has gone to or is looking for something for their kids to do, there are actually some activity sheets at lucytriesbooks.com that are easily printable. So for the parents who are looking for something for their kids to do while they're
Yes.
not at school, there's that. But
yes, and they're free, Jason. Yes, you can download them for free, and there's like dot to dot and coloring pages, and yeah, you can download that off lucytrisports.com. Print them for free.
Absolutely. Which brings us to this point, the pinnacle question of the podcast. So, Lisa Bose, if you were to introduce yourself to a complete stranger, but instead of saying, "Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm the author of Lucy Tries Sports," you basically hand them a mixtape. And on that mixtape are songs that tell the story of you. What songs are on that tape, and why are they there?
Well, I'm going to start actually with Harry Chapin, the song Circle, and maybe 30,000 pounds of bananas. And I'm probably dating myself here, but Harry Chapin was an incredible folk singer from the United States. He tragically died in 1981. And the reason why I chose that to tell you about Harry Chapin off the top is because if I hear that music, I'm completely brought right back to my childhood, my family. We were on so many road trips, and like so many of us, we grew up with what our parents liked to listen to. And Harry Chapin was an artist that my parents loved to play. Bob Seger was another one, Roger Whittaker, but I'm going to say Harry Chapin because that really speaks to me as a child, and it speaks to me as the time in the 70s of growing up with American folk songs from the 70s. So I'd say Harry Chapin, number one. Secondly, I'm going to say actually Mirror in the Bathroom by the English Beat. That really speaks to me in my high school years, the ska period. The 80s was so, wow. I mean, so many different genres of music in the 80s, but I really loved the ska music. And so the English Beat really was at the forefront of that. So every time I hear Mirror in the Bathroom, it's also a very frenetic type of song, right? And you're, right away it's you're bopping around doing the ska dance. So I'm going to say the English Beat. Another one I'm going to say is actually Vivaldi. I love Baroque music. I took French horn when I was in junior high, and that really introduced me to classical. I was actually, I will say, quote unquote, forced to take piano when I was very young. But music has always been a part of my life, and classical music especially so, especially the Baroque period. I like these smaller sound, and even though there are no horns in the Baroque, here I am a French horn player. But so his Four Seasons is really what I love, and I love the winter movement from Four Seasons from Vivaldi, Antonio Vivaldi. Next up, I guess I would say if you were going to, something else that would really speak to me would be Celtic influence. My family is from Scotland and Ireland, and I've been back to Scotland. My mother was a Mackay, although they also say Mackay. And so I'm going to say Scotland the Brave, just as something, as a traditional piece that really does speak to my soul. I love Lorena McKennitt too, just as a Canadian composer in that Celtic realm as well. But Scotland the Brave. And the last thing I'm actually going to say is U2's Beautiful Day. And the reason why is because I really try to always have a positive outlook on life. I really am always trying to see positives no matter what, because I really believe we choose, right, how we respond to things. And even in COVID times, it's brutal and it's hard, but I always, even this, like the sun is shining here in Calgary today. So that's a positive. And so I'm really trying to teach my daughter as well about always looking on the positive. So when I hear Beautiful Day, that keeps me, I guess, upbeat and positive.
Of all the books in the series so far. Is there something that Lucy hasn't tried yet that is on the horizon?
Well, I have written the manuscript for Lucy Tries Baseball. And I wrote that actually, Jason, almost a year and a half ago, actually. I wrote it a long time ago, but it is very challenging to get books published. And then when COVID hit, it was even more so. The difficulty was even greater because a lot of publishers really had to just shut down for a while. And so I do not have a publisher yet. I'm hoping my publisher will come back with me on Lucy Tries Baseball. I'd like to also to be in French, Lucy Joue au Baseball. And the reason why I like this story is because it also works on the theme of Lucy and her family playing in their backyard, just outdoor play again. And the grandparents are also involved. So once again, an active start equals an active life. And as you see in baseball today, it mirrors what's going on in Major League Baseball with the inclusion of many women on pro teams in the coaching ranks. And so my third base coach, even before Alyssa Nakken, I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly.
I think it is. I think it is Alyssa Nakken with the San Francisco Giants.
Yeah, with the Giants. So right before she was hired, I was actually thinking about the next Lucy book, and I was thinking how I need to have a female coach in there. So the third base coach in my Lucy Tries Baseball manuscript is a female. And so it's kind of a neat story, and it's co-ed, right? Boys and girls playing together just like they are in soccer.
Lisa, thank you for your time, and thank you for Lucy as well. Where can we find you on social media, and where can we get our hands on the Lucy Tries Sports books?
Well, you can find Lucy Tries Sports books anywhere books are sold, online, in the Indigos, and certainly in your favorite indie bookstore. I love to, really try to support our Canadian independent bookstores, but she is online, and you can also find her on the LucyTriesSports.com website. There's a way too for you to order these books. And there's also a Lucy High Five pack out now. That came out last year. And I should also mention that Lucy Tries Soccer is going to be released this coming October in French and Spanish, which is really exciting for us. So that's how you can find the Lucy books. And thank you so much, Jason, for having me. It was a lovely discussion. I never talk about music.
Right? Well, we like to talk a lot of music here, and I'm just happy that you were able to give us the time today. Thank you to all of our listeners for listening to this episode of the Made You a Mixtape podcast. If you are listening to us in an audio streaming service, you can watch this entire interview on YouTube. But if you're watching us on YouTube, you can actually download this episode on your favorite audio streaming service and listen to us on the go. Until next time, I'm Jason. This has been the Made You a Mixtape podcast. We'll catch you later.